She got suspended without warning. No reason, no explanation, just a pink slip and a locked door. No one listened when she said she did nothing wrong. But her mother didn't raise her to stay quiet. And what happened next, no one in that school saw coming. Before we start the story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss a new story. Talia Moore sat outside the school office with her hands in her lap, holding a pink suspension slip that felt heavier than it should. Her eyes were still red from trying not to cry. She kept her back straight, but her shoulders shook now and then. Down the hall, students glanced at her, then quickly looked away. A group of girls whispered as they passed, pretending not to stare. No one said anything, but the way they looked at her felt worse than words. From behind the office door, Principal Reed Carrington stepped out for a moment. He didn't look at Talia. He just told the secretary, "Call her mother if you haven't already," then walked back into his office without a second glance. Talia stared at the floor, her voice barely above a whisper. She doesn't even know yet. The air outside the building was cool, but it didn't help. As Talia walked through the courtyard, a few boys sitting on the bench near the science wing looked up. One of them leaned over and asked another, "What did she even do?" The other shrugged and said, "Probably got caught cheating or something." Talia heard it. She didn't stop. She just tightened her grip on the slip and kept walking, one foot in front of the other. She hadn't done anything. No fight, no shouting, no skipped class. She had asked a question during a school board visit last week. Something about why the school didn't have a student council. It was a calm question. The teachers had smiled, but Principal Carrington had stared at her the whole time like she'd said something wrong. Her mother didn't pick up the phone when she called. It went straight to voicemail. Talia didn't know what to say, so she hung up. She sat on the city bus with the slip folded in her hand, pressed tight between her fingers. No one on the bus looked at her. That was fine. She didn't want to be seen. She sat still, watching trees and parking lots pass by. She didn't cry anymore. She was too tired. When the bus reached her stop, she stood up slowly, walked to the door, and stepped off with her head down. At the corner of her street, she looked up just once to see if her mother's car was home. It wasn't. The driveway was empty. Talia opened the front door with her key, dropped her backpack on the floor, and sat at the dining table. The slip was still in her hand. She laid it down in front of her and waited in silence. The house stayed quiet for the next hour. Talia didn't turn on the lights. The soft gray from the cloudy sky outside was enough. She sat at the table staring at the pink paper like it might change if she waited long enough. Her phone buzzed once. It was a message from a girl in her English class, someone she barely talked to. It just said, "What happened?" Talia locked the phone without answering. She didn't even know what to say. There was no clear reason. No warning. No write-up. Just the paper. At 5:42 p.m., the front door opened. Denise Moore stepped in, holding 2 brown grocery bags. Her heels clicked against the tile before she paused in the doorway, sensing something off. She looked over and saw her daughter sitting at the table, still wearing her backpack. Denise didn't speak right away. She set the bags down slowly, took off her coat, and walked over. Her voice was calm. "What's that in front of you?" Talia didn't answer. She just pushed the paper forward. Denise picked it up, read it silently, then sat down across from her. Her eyes moved over the words again. "Suspended," she read aloud, quiet and flat, "for defiance." There was no change in her face, no raised voice, just a long pause, as if she was calculating something inside her head. "Did you yell at anyone?" she asked. "No." "Hit someone, damage something?" "No." "Did you talk back?" Talia shook her head. "I asked why the school didn't have a student council during that board tour last week. That's all I did." Denise nodded once. She didn't take notes. She didn't ask anything else. She just folded the paper neatly, stood up, and walked to the kitchen. She opened a drawer and pulled out a file folder, thick, clean, and navy blue. She slid the slip inside. Then she took out her phone, sat down at the counter, and started making calls. Talia didn't move. She watched her mother work in silence. The tone of her voice didn't change. Every sentence was short, direct, and careful. Yes, this is Denise Moore. I need a copy of the school's official disciplinary report for student Talia Moore. Yes, I'll wait. When she was done, she hung up, took out a small notepad and wrote something down. Then she turned around and said quietly, "You're not going back to school until I say so." Talia finally spoke. "Are you mad at me?" Denise looked at her for a long second. "I'm not mad at you." She tapped the folder with her finger. "I'm mad at the pattern." Talia sat on the edge of the couch with her knees pulled up and her arms around them. She watched her mother quietly cross the room, take off her earrings and place them in the small dish near the bookshelf like she did every evening. But tonight, every movement felt different, sharper, more exact. Denise didn't slam anything, didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The silence in the house did all the talking. Talia wanted to say something, but the words didn't come. She wasn't sure if she was more afraid of her mom being disappointed or of her mom going quiet. Denise's silence wasn't cold. It was focused, controlled, like she'd seen this before and was already 3 steps ahead. Denise finally sat down in the armchair across from her. She didn't lean back. She sat upright, knees together, both hands resting on the armrests. "You remember that girl last year?" she asked. "The one suspended for wearing the wrong color hoodie?" Talia nodded. "Lena. She moved schools after that." Denise gave a short breath through her nose. Her mom couldn't fight it, not without backing, not without money. She looked straight at her daughter. "We're not going to let this pass." Talia stared at the floor. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble. I really didn't." Denise softened, just for a second. "You didn't." "They did." There was a pause, long enough that Talia thought the conversation might be over. But then Denise leaned forward and said in a quieter tone, "Let me ask you something. When he told you, when Carrington handed you that paper, what did he look like?" Talia blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean his face, his eyes. Did he seem confused? Did he hesitate?" Talia remembered. She remembered too well. He hadn't looked confused. He hadn't looked rushed or uncertain. He looked calm, like he had already decided everything, like she was a file he was closing and moving on from. "No," she said. He didn't blink. He said it like I was already guilty. Denise nodded slowly, like she had expected that answer. "That's how it starts. Quiet, clean, polite, and wrong." She stood again and walked to the hallway, stopping at the closet where she kept her work bag. From it, she pulled out a silver pin with small initials engraved on the side. Talia had seen it once before, years ago when her mom had testified in court on behalf of a school discrimination case. The pin read, "Office of Civil Rights, Education Division." Talia's eyes widened a little. She didn't speak, but her throat tightened. Her mother turned and said, calm but firm, "I need you to get some rest, because tomorrow I'm going to remind your school who they're dealing with." The next morning came heavy and gray. Talia woke up early without needing an alarm. Her eyes opened slowly, her body still tense from the night before. She didn't reach for her phone. She didn't even pull the covers back right away. She just stared at the ceiling, quiet and still, her thoughts twisting in a loop. What if people thought she really did something? What if the school never took her back? What if this ruined everything? She had worked so hard to stay out of trouble, never missed a deadline, always raised her hand, never talked back, even when other students made jokes behind her back. Her biggest mistake was asking a question that had felt important at the time. Now it just felt dangerous. Down the hall, she heard the faint sound of her mother's voice. Calm, controlled, on the phone again, probably talking to someone from her office. Talia slowly sat up, rubbed her eyes, and wrapped herself in her robe. The silence in the house still hung thick. but underneath it was something new. Purpose. Movement. Her mother wasn't pacing the floor or sighing out loud. She was doing something, and that scared Talia more than anything else, because she didn't know what it meant yet. When she stepped into the kitchen, Denise was already dressed. Dark blazer, dark pants, plain blouse. Hair pinned back in a neat twist. No jewelry, no lipstick. Just her natural face, clear and unreadable. She stood at the counter sipping from a ceramic mug, her other hand flipping through a legal folder with yellow sticky notes sticking out from the sides. Talia stood in the doorway without saying anything. Denise looked up once, gave her a small nod. "Eat something," she said. "You need to keep your head clear." "I'm not hungry," Talia replied. Denise raised an eyebrow but didn't push. "Suit yourself," she said softly, then went back to reading. Talia sat down at the table anyway, more out of habit than appetite. She picked at a piece of toast, not eating it, just moving it around on the plate. The room felt too quiet again, but this time, the silence wasn't empty. It was loaded. She looked at her mother and hesitated. "Are you sure we should do this? I don't want to make things worse." Denise looked up from the folder, her face still calm, but now focused squarely on her daughter. Worse than being punished for nothing. Talia's lips parted, but no words came out. She didn't have an answer. She knew her mother was right. Still, the fear in her chest felt real. She imagined walking back into school with people staring, teachers whispering, maybe even losing friends who believed what they heard. What if her mom's fight made her a bigger target? I don't want you to get in trouble either," she said quietly. Denise leaned on the counter, both hands flat now, her eyes steady. "Talia," she said slowly, "I have spent the last 14 years teaching you to stand up straight, speak with respect, and know your worth. I didn't do that so you could shrink when someone small tries to make you feel invisible." Talia's throat burned, but she held the tears back. She didn't want to cry. Not now. "You didn't do anything wrong," her mother continued. "That man thinks he can get away with this because he thinks you're alone. But you're not. You've got me. And I've got more than just opinions. I've got law." The words settled into Talia's chest like a quiet drumbeat. Strong. Heavy. Real. Denise reached for her coat. She tucked the folder under her arm, grabbed her keys, then turned to her daughter. "Get dressed. I want you with me when we walk in. You don't have to say anything. Just stand tall." Talia nodded slowly. For the first time since she was sent home, she felt something other than shame. It wasn't relief yet. It wasn't power, but it was something steadier. Like the ground under her feet had stopped shifting. As Denise opened the door, the cold morning air rushed in. She didn't flinch. Talia followed close behind, eyes lowered but steps steady. The house stayed quiet as the door clicked shut behind them. But outside, something had already started to change. The school building looked different that morning. Not because anything had changed on the outside, but because of what Talia now felt standing in front of it. She had passed through these glass doors nearly every day for 3 years, sometimes with nerves, sometimes with calm. But today, her chest felt like it was holding a full cup of water. One wrong movement and it would spill. Her hands stayed clenched inside her coat pockets, her jaw tight. She kept her head down, only lifting it when her mother stopped walking. Denise stood still near the main entrance, eyes scanning the building slowly like she was reading a courtroom. Her shoulders were straight, her chin lifted. Not angry, not nervous, just still and sure. She glanced at the tall windows that looked into the front office, then at the small crowd of students gathered on the benches by the gym entrance. Some of them noticed Talia. A few nudged each other, a few pointed. She felt the weight of it but didn't react. Her mother hadn't told her to ignore them, but somehow she didn't need to. When they stepped inside, the fluorescent lights washed everything in a pale, flat glow. The front desk clerk, a woman in her 50s with clipped words and a tired expression, looked up. "Do you have an appointment?" Denise didn't answer right away. She reached into her bag and pulled out a sealed envelope. She placed it on the desk without a word. The woman glanced down at it, then back at Denise. Her tone shifted a little. "One moment," She picked up the phone and called into the back. Talia watched her mother stand there, patient but unmoving, like a tree that didn't sway with the wind. Inside, her stomach still turned. What if this backfired? What if the school twisted things more? What if Principal Carrington made her life harder after this? She almost opened her mouth to whisper something, maybe tell her mom to let it go. But she didn't, because her mother's expression hadn't changed. Not once. A few minutes later, the office door opened. Principal Reed Carrington stepped out, wearing his usual charcoal suit and a thin smile that didn't touch his eyes. "Ms. Moore," he said with a calm voice, as if nothing unusual had happened. "I wasn't expecting you." Denise nodded once. "That's the point." Talia could feel the tension roll across the room like a quiet wave. Mr. Carrington's eyes slid toward her for a moment, but he didn't acknowledge her directly. "Let's step into my office," he said, gesturing with one hand. They followed him in. Talia noticed the way the office looked too neat. Everything lined up perfectly. No papers on the desk except for one open folder. It smelled faintly of coffee and lemon cleaner. Mr. Carrington sat behind his desk while Denise remained standing. She didn't even look for a chair. "I assume this is about Talia's suspension," he said, his tone polite but slightly dismissive, as if he was already prepared to end the conversation in under 5 minutes. Denise opened the file in her hands and pulled out a printed document. She placed it gently on his desk. "This is a copy of the court order I filed this morning." The smile on Carrington's face twitched for just a second. He didn't pick up the paper right away. "I don't think this is necessary," Denise spoke calmly over him. "You suspended my daughter without documentation, without a phone call, and without due process. She has no history of misconduct, and yet you marked her for defiance with no record, no explanation, and no hearing." Carrington opened his mouth, but Denise continued. "This document," she said, tapping the court order, "requires you to present all evidence of the disciplinary action to a state-appointed hearing within 10 days. You will also be required to disclose any informal notes taken about my daughter to the district attorney's review team." Talia sat frozen. The air in the room felt thinner. Carrington slowly leaned back in his chair. His jaw tightened. "Ms. Moore, I assure you, this was handled in accordance with school policy." "No," Denise interrupted, her voice steady. "It was handled in accordance with your habit of making students like my daughter disappear quietly." The room went completely silent. Talia looked at her mother. She had never seen her like this before. Not angry, not loud, just sharp, like every word had been polished before it left her mouth. Carrington cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "If you're going to escalate this—" "I'm not escalating," Denise replied. "I'm responding." She turned to Talia and gave her a small nod. Then back to Carrington, she added, "You don't get to pick which students are worth protecting, and you don't get to punish questions just because they make you uncomfortable." With that, she gathered her folder and stepped back. "Expect a follow-up from our legal representative before the week ends." Carrington didn't speak. He just sat there, staring at the paper on his desk. Talia stood up slowly. Her legs felt shaky, but she kept her balance. She followed her mother out of the office, past the front desk, through the wide hallway where more students had begun to gather. And for the first time in days, she lifted her head. The hallway felt colder now, not from the air but from the way it wrapped around Talia as she walked. Her shoes made soft sounds against the polished floor, and every footstep echoed a little too loud in her ears. Students leaned against lockers, backpacks on one shoulder, half watching her without saying a word. It wasn't the same kind of staring as before. There was a quiet, uncertain curiosity in their faces. Not mockery this time. Not suspicion. Just something else. Something she didn't know how to name yet. She wanted to shrink. She wanted to disappear into her coat, pull the hood over her head and vanish through the cracks in the wall. But her mother was walking beside her, straight, calm, eyes forward. So Talia kept going too, her spine a little straighter than it had been that morning. As they reached the parking lot, Denise finally stopped. She didn't speak right away. She looked up at the sky instead. The clouds were still thick, but light was breaking through in patches, soft and pale. Talia waited, unsure if she should say something. Her heartbeat hadn't slowed since they left the office. Denise finally turned and looked at her daughter, really looked at her. Not with the expression of a lawyer or a woman handling a problem, but just as a mother. "You all right?" she asked, voice lower now, less guarded. Talia hesitated. She didn't know what all right was supposed to feel like. Her hands were still clammy. Her chest was still tight. But somewhere inside her, past all the nervousness and noise, she could feel something loosening. Like the knot that had been there since she first held the suspension slip was finally starting to untangle. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I think so." Denise nodded like that was good enough. She placed a hand on Talia's shoulder, firm and warm. "Let's go home," she said. The drive was quiet. Denise kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting in her lap. The radio stayed off. No calls, no emails. Just the soft hum of tires on pavement and the distant sound of traffic lights changing. Talia stared out the window, watching trees blur past. Her thoughts flickered between moments, Carrington's face, her mother's voice, the paper on the desk. She tried to process everything, but it all felt too large to hold at once. She finally turned to her mom. "Do you think he'll get in trouble?" Denise didn't look over. "That's not the point." "But he should," Talia said, her voice firmer than she expected. Denise gave a quiet breath. "The point is accountability. It's about showing people like him that someone's watching, that someone will speak up when they think they're untouchable." Talia nodded slowly. She understood, or she was starting to. When they reached home, the house felt different too. Not louder, not lighter, but less heavy. Like the walls were holding less pressure. Inside, Talia kicked off her shoes and dropped her backpack by the hallway table. She didn't go straight to her room like usual. Instead, she followed her mom into the kitchen. Denise poured herself a glass of water and leaned against the counter. "You handled yourself well in there." Talia gave a small shrug. "I didn't say anything." "You didn't have to," Denise replied. "You showed up, you stood tall. That matters more than you think." Talia looked down, then back up. "Are we really going to court?" "If we need to," her mother said. "But sometimes just letting them see we're not afraid is enough to shake their whole system." There was silence for a moment. A deep, restful kind. Then, without thinking too much, Talia walked over and hugged her. It wasn't dramatic or long. Just enough. Denise didn't say anything, but her hand went to her daughter's back, gentle and steady. For the first time in a long time, Talia felt safe. Not just because she was home, but because someone had stood up for her. And not in a loud, dramatic way, but in the kind of way that changes things without anyone needing to clap. Later that afternoon, Talia sat at her desk, looking at her school books. She didn't open them yet. She just sat, letting herself breathe. The weight hadn't fully left, but now at least she knew it wasn't hers to carry alone. By the next morning, the school felt like a different world. Talia hadn't returned yet, but the building was already humming with tension. Word had spread faster than anyone expected. Not because Denise had told anyone, but because people had seen. Office staff had witnessed the conversation. A substitute teacher had overheard parts of it, and students had eyes, ears, and phones. Even when they weren't supposed to be watching, they were. They talked in whispers, behind hands, over text threads that grew by the hour. Talia's mom brought a court order. "Principal Carrington's in trouble. They're gonna review everything now." No one said these things out loud in front of teachers, but the energy was there, buzzing through the halls, bouncing off lockers and bathroom stalls. And in the middle of it all, Principal Reed Carrington sat behind his closed office door, rereading the order Denise Moore had delivered just a day earlier. His hand rested on the desk, motionless. The office was too quiet. He had dismissed his assistant for the morning. The phone rang once, but he let it ring. He wasn't ready to speak. In the corner of his desk sat a small frame, A photo of the last student award assembly, the one where he had stood at the microphone, shaking hands and smiling. Talia Moore had been there too, not on stage but in the crowd, clapping quietly like everyone else. He hadn't even noticed her then. Now he couldn't stop thinking about her. He remembered the meeting from last week, when the school board members toured classrooms. She had raised her hand during a Q&A, asked why the school had no student council. He hadn't liked the way she said it. Too direct, too confident for a sophomore. It hadn't been rude, but it had challenged him, and that was enough to annoy him. He had flagged her mentally that day, marked her as disruptive. Not because she'd broken a rule, but because she'd made him feel small for a second, and he didn't like that feeling. That's all it took. A silent mark in his mind. A quiet choice to keep an eye on her. A decision days later to remove her under the label of defiance. No written warning, no conversation, just a signed form and a closed door. Now that door felt smaller. Across campus, a few teachers gathered in the break room. Ms. Dunn, the history teacher, stirred her coffee and looked around carefully before she spoke. Has anyone else noticed how fast things are moving? Mr. Price, the science teacher, nodded. I heard the district's asking for all disciplinary records, not just hers. Another teacher leaned in, lowering her voice. I think they're doing a full audit on Carrington. No one said much after that. They sipped their drinks and pretended not to know more. That same morning, Denise sat at her kitchen table, laptop open, files spread neatly beside her. She had spoken with a civil rights advocate the night before. A quiet conversation. No threats. Just facts. The kind that made people rethink their assumptions. She paused her typing and looked across the room at Talia, who was sitting on the couch, knees pulled up again, a book in her lap but unread. Her eyes kept drifting. Not lost, but somewhere deeper. Processing. Denise spoke gently. You don't have to go back yet. Not until they respond. Talia nodded. I know. A pause. Then, do you think they'll actually say sorry? Denise looked at her daughter. They might not. But that's not the point. Then what is? The point, she said slowly, is that they now know you're not invisible. Talia breathed in, held it, and let it out slowly. She looked down at her book again, not to read, but just to hold something. She thought about the office, the looks, the way Carrington never gave her a real reason. She thought about how easy it had been for him to write her off, how calm he had been while doing it, and how it wasn't just about her. It was about how many other kids he'd done the same thing to, quietly, efficiently, without being challenged. Maybe that was what bothered her most. Not just that it happened to her, but that she might not be the first, or the last. And for the first time, she realized something new. This wasn't just about getting her record cleared. It was about pulling something hidden into the light. Not with anger, not with shouting, but with truth. And once truth is in the open, it doesn't go away easily. She didn't feel strong yet, but she didn't feel small either, somewhere in between. And that was enough, for now. The following afternoon brought a kind of stillness that didn't feel like peace. It felt like something holding its breath. Talia sat by the living room window, a blanket wrapped around her legs, watching as kids from the neighborhood walked home from school. Backpacks bouncing, voices rising and falling with the wind. She used to be one of them. Now, watching from the other side of the glass made her feel like a ghost in her own routine. She hadn't stepped back onto campus since the morning with her mother. No teachers had called, no apology, no update, just silence. And silence could feel louder than noise when you were waiting for someone to admit they were wrong. Denise hadn't said much that day either. She was in her room on Zoom calls, speaking in her firm but measured tone. The one Talia had grown up hearing through walls and doorways. The sound of her mother fighting, not with fists or shouting, but with rules, logic, and words that left no room for excuses. That sound used to make Talia feel safe. Now it made her feel something else too, guilt. Not because she had done anything wrong, but because part of her wished the whole thing would just stop. that she could wake up and go back to being invisible, unnoticed, unchallenged, that she hadn't raised her hand during that board visit, that she hadn't opened her mouth. The guilt didn't make sense, but it was there. She tugged the blanket tighter and pressed her forehead to the cool glass. Maybe if she had just stayed quiet, this wouldn't have happened. Maybe she wouldn't be the girl everyone whispered about now. She thought of her classmates. What did they think? That she was lying, overreacting, that her mom was being too dramatic? Her thoughts turned to Carrington, his face, his eyes, that blank expression he wore when he handed her the pink slip, like it was just another task on his checklist. She remembered how quickly he turned away afterward, like she was an errand he'd already finished. Her stomach tightened. She didn't want to admit it, but part of her had believed him that day. Not because she thought she deserved it, but because he had acted so sure, so calm, as if her words, her presence, didn't matter. That kind of confidence was dangerous. It made you doubt yourself. She stood up and walked to her room. Her journal was on the bed, still open from the last time she tried to write. The page was mostly blank. Only one sentence sat in the middle of the sheet. I didn't do anything wrong, but they made me feel like I did. She sat down and stared at the sentence for a long time. That was the thing no one told you about this kind of injustice. It didn't just attack your record. It attacked your memory. It made you question your own actions, rewrite your day, undo your sense of self piece by piece, quietly, without leaving a mark anyone else could see. Her phone buzzed. A text from Nari, the girl from her Spanish class. They weren't close, but they'd worked on a project together once. Hey, just wanted to say I heard what happened. That was really messed up. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. Talia stared at the screen. Her thumb hovered over the keyboard. She didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to respond. Part of her didn't want to open that door, to answer questions, to relive the moment. But she typed anyway. Thanks. I'm okay. I think. She hesitated, then added, I didn't expect it to go this far. Nari responded almost immediately. That's how it always is. People don't listen until someone forces them to. Talia read the words again and again. People don't listen until someone forces them to. She closed the phone, leaned back, and let the words sink in. Maybe this wasn't just about her anymore. Maybe it never was. She didn't feel brave, she didn't feel strong. But she was starting to feel clear. And clarity, even in small pieces, was stronger than shame. Stronger than fear. Outside the window, the sky was darkening, clouds thinning into strips of gray and blue. The day was ending, but something inside her was beginning to unfold, quietly but fully. 2 days later, the phone rang. It was late morning. Denise had just finished a call with the school board's legal office, and Talia was curled up on the couch with a bowl of cereal she'd barely touched. The sound startled both of them, not because the phone hadn't rung before, but because somehow they both knew this time was different. Denise picked it up and answered with her usual calm, measured tone. Denise Moore speaking. Talia watched from the living room, legs folded underneath her, eyes locked on her mother's face. She could only hear one side of the conversation, but even one side was enough to feel the shift. I see. A pause. Yes, I'm listening. Another pause. Denise walked slowly to the window, her fingers drumming softly against the table. No, that's not acceptable. Not without a written apology and a correction to her file. More silence. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Then we'll see you in court. That's all. She hung up without flinching. Talia sat up straighter, heart beating harder now. Was that them? Denise didn't answer right away. She placed the phone down gently, like it might break if handled too quickly, then turned toward her daughter. They offered to remove the suspension, she said. Privately. Off the record. No admission of fault. Talia blinked. So, they want to fix it but not admit they were wrong. Denise gave a small nod. They wanted to disappear quietly, just like they made you disappear. That sentence sat heavy in the room. Talia stared at the wall across from her. Part of her felt relief. It was over, wasn't it? The suspension gone, the punishment erased. Wasn't that what she wanted? To not be the girl suspended for nothing? To return to normal, to walk through the halls without eyes on her? But then another feeling stirred underneath. Something colder, sharper. "They're still pretending they didn't do anything wrong," she said, almost to herself. "Yes," Denise replied, walking over and sitting on the armrest of the couch. "Because that's what people like Carrington do. They clean up messes without ever admitting they made them." Talia looked down at her cereal. It had gone soggy. She pushed it away. "What happens if we don't accept?" she asked. "Then we keep going," her mother said. "It'll be longer, harder, maybe messier, but it'll be public, on record, and permanent." Talia nodded slowly. Her stomach twisted, not from fear this time, but from the weight of choice. She wasn't used to that. Usually, adults made decisions for her. Teachers told her when to speak, how to act. Even her mother, as supportive as she was, had always been the one in control. But this was different. This was about her name, her dignity, her voice. She looked up. "I don't want it off the record." Denise paused, not because she disagreed, but because she was proud. And pride for her always showed in stillness, never in praise. "Okay," she said softly. "Then we move forward." Later that afternoon, Denise drafted the formal response to the district's offer. Talia stood behind her, reading every word. It wasn't dramatic. There were no threats, just truth, written plainly. "We respectfully decline your offer to resolve this matter in private. We request a formal acknowledgement of the wrongful disciplinary action and a written apology included in the student's file. Otherwise, we will proceed with the scheduled hearing as outlined in the court order." Talia read it 3 times. It didn't sound angry. It didn't sound scared. It sounded final. She imagined Carrington reading it, sitting behind his big desk with his coffee and his safe little routines. She wondered what his face would look like when he realized the student he once dismissed as disruptive wasn't just pushing back. She was pushing forward. Legally, publicly, without backing down. Her chest tightened. But this time it wasn't panic. It was something close to resolve. That night Talia opened her journal again, not just to stare at it, but to write. She didn't start with a quote or a line from someone else. She just wrote the first thing that came to her. "I was taught to be quiet when I felt small. But now I understand. Speaking up doesn't make you loud, it makes you heard." She stared at the sentence for a long time, then underlined it. Once. Firmly. The hearing date arrived faster than anyone expected. It was set for a Thursday morning, in a plain beige administrative building tucked between a government parking lot and a half-empty library. Talia sat in the car beside her mother, staring out at the cracked sidewalk and the faded blue sign that read District Office, Room B103. Her palms were damp. Her heart thudded in a slow, steady rhythm that seemed to echo through her arms and chest. Denise hadn't said much on the drive. She was focused, her voice even and her eyes clear. She'd reviewed the file 3 times the night before. Everything was labeled, organized, underlined. She wasn't nervous. At least not outwardly. But Talia could feel the weight in the silence between them. It wasn't fear, it was preparation. She looked at her daughter now. "You don't have to speak unless you want to," she said gently. Talia nodded, eyes fixed on the building. "I know." "Just remember," Denise added, "they'll try to keep it clean. Professional. But that doesn't mean it's neutral. They already made a choice. They just didn't expect anyone to challenge it." Talia swallowed. "What if I mess up?" Her mother reached over, placing a warm, steady hand on hers. "Telling the truth isn't something you can mess up. Just speak it how it feels, not how it sounds." That helped. A little. They walked into the building side by side. The hallway smelled faintly of printer ink and coffee. Neutral, lifeless, like a space that wanted to erase emotion from the walls. But Talia carried hers in anyway. Not loudly. just in the way her shoulders held still and her steps stayed slow and firm. Inside, room B103, a long table stretched across the center. At one end sat a hearing officer with a small laptop and a stack of documents. Two representatives from the school district sat nearby, one tapping a pen against her binder, the other flipping slowly through a printed copy of Talia's record. On the far side of the room, Principal Carrington was already seated. He didn't look up when they walked in. Talia saw the way his suit was perfect, his tie crisp, his posture stiff and practiced. He looked like someone trying hard to stay untouched. Untouched by the weight of what was happening. Untouched by the damage he caused. She sat beside her mother, back straight, hands folded tightly in her lap. Her heart hadn't stopped racing, but she wasn't shaking. That felt like progress. The hearing officer cleared her throat. "We're here today to address the disciplinary action taken against Talia Moore, age 15, for alleged defiance on school property. Ms. Moore and her legal guardian have challenged the validity of this action. We will begin with their statement." Denise stood slowly. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't bring drama. She read from a prepared page, but her eyes lifted often, locking directly with each person at the table. "My daughter, Talia Moore, was suspended without prior warning, without documentation, and without a single conversation. She was sent home under the label of defiance, a vague and subjective term often applied disproportionately to black students, especially girls. No incident report was filed. No teacher complaints were submitted. No due process was followed." Carrington shifted in his seat. Denise continued, "My daughter's only action was asking a question: why the school did not offer a student council. This question was posed publicly during a school board visit. It was met with silence at the time and punishment days later. That is not discipline, that is retaliation." Talia looked down, breathing deeply through her nose. Her throat felt tight, but she kept her eyes dry. She was proud, and terrified, and unsure, all at once. Denise sat. The room was still. Carrington stood next, clearing his throat. "I acted within the scope of my authority," he said. "Ms. Moore's behavior had been escalating. I received reports, verbal ones, from staff who found her tone inappropriate in class discussions. While these were not formal complaints, I used my discretion, as allowed by district policy, to issue a short suspension." Talia felt her face flush. Verbal reports? She had never been told any of that. No one had spoken to her. No one had said a single word about her tone. And now it was being used like it had been obvious all along. The hearing officer raised her head. "Do we have any documentation of those verbal complaints?" Carrington hesitated. "No formal documentation, no." Denise leaned forward. "So it's her word against undocumented rumors?" Carrington's mouth opened slightly, then closed. The hearing officer scribbled something down. For a few moments no one spoke. Then, softly, Talia's voice broke the silence. "I was scared," she said. All eyes turned to her. "I didn't know what I did wrong," she continued. "No one told me. He didn't even look at me when he handed me the paper. I walked out of that building thinking I had ruined something, my reputation, my record, my future. And I had no idea why." Her voice cracked slightly at the end, but she didn't stop. "I stayed up that night trying to remember every word I said, every sentence, wondering if I had said too much or said it wrong. I didn't sleep. I didn't talk to anyone. I thought maybe I should have just stayed quiet." Her eyes met Carrington's finally. "But I'm not going to stay quiet anymore." The room went silent again, but this time it felt full, like something had landed. The hearing officer slowly nodded. "Thank you, Ms. Moore." Talia sat back in her chair, exhaling slowly. Her hands were still shaking a little, but her chest didn't feel so tight anymore. She wasn't invisible, not today, and nothing Carrington said could undo that now. The hearing ended without ceremony. No final speech, no gavel, no dramatic verdict. Just a quiet, "We'll review and notify all parties within 5 business days." followed by the rustle of papers, the closing of folders, and the soft scrape of chairs against the tiled floor. Talia stood slowly. Her knees felt stiff, but she kept her back straight as she followed Denise out of the room. Neither of them said anything in the hallway. They didn't need to. The quiet between them now was different. Heavier, yes, but not with dread. It was the weight of everything that had been spoken. Everything that had been held in too long, finally let out. Outside, the sky was dull with winter clouds, and the wind had picked up. Talia tucked her hands deep into her coat pockets and looked down at the sidewalk, watching her steps as she walked. For a moment, she didn't know what to feel. Relief, pride, exhaustion. She felt all of them, and yet none were loud enough to fully settle her thoughts. She turned to her mom as they approached the car. "Do you think it mattered?" Denise opened the door but didn't get in right away. She looked across the hood of the car at her daughter and answered with quiet certainty, "Yes. Even if they won't admit it, it mattered." Talia got in and closed the door gently. Her reflection in the window looked older somehow. Not by years, but by weight, like she had carried something heavy and was still figuring out how to set it down. As they pulled out of the lot, Denise finally broke the silence. "You spoke well." "I was shaking the whole time." "You still spoke." Talia looked out the window. "He just lied. So calmly, like it was nothing." Denise didn't respond right away. Because for him, it was nothing. Until it wasn't. The road passed slowly, familiar buildings sliding by, stores she'd walked past 100 times, a bus stop where she used to wait on rainy mornings. But today everything felt a little different. Sharper. As if the world had shifted slightly, just enough for her to notice cracks she hadn't seen before. Back home, Denise went straight to the kitchen and placed the file down on the table, careful not to wrinkle a single page. Talia followed her but stopped in the doorway, arms crossed loosely. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we wait," her mother said. "But we don't sit still." Talia frowned. "What do you mean?" Denise opened a drawer and pulled out a thick envelope. She handed it to Talia. Inside were printed pages, half-filled forms, and a set of guidelines from the district's student rights handbook. "We're submitting a proposal," she said. "A push for policy change. You're not the only student who's been silenced, Talia. You're just the one who spoke loud enough for people to hear." Talia held the envelope and felt its weight. It was heavier than it looked, not because of the paper, but because of what it meant. This wasn't just about her anymore. Still, part of her hesitated. "What if people at school hate me for this?" she asked, the words quiet, almost reluctant. "What if they think I'm trying to start drama or make it all about me?" Denise paused and walked over. She didn't speak with certainty this time. She spoke with care. "Some people might, because it's easier to blame the person who points out the crack than to admit the foundation is broken. But that doesn't mean you're wrong." Talia nodded, but the knot in her stomach stayed. The next few days moved slowly. She didn't return to school right away, though she knew she would have to. And the longer she waited, the more tangled her thoughts became. What would it be like? To walk back into that building? Would people stare? Would they whisper when she passed? Would teachers treat her differently? Would anyone say anything at all? Every time she thought she was ready, a new question crept in. And underneath it all was something deeper, something she didn't like admitting even to herself. What if nothing changed? What if the hearing came and went, and Carrington stayed in his seat, smiling in meetings, handing out punishments like he always had? She tried to push the thought away, but it lingered. One night, as she sat on her bed, she pulled out her journal again. She flipped back through the pages, some filled with half-written thoughts, some blank, some just marked with a sentence or two. She found the page where she had written, "I didn't do anything wrong, but they made me feel like I did." She stared at it for a long time. Then, below it, she added, "Now I know that even when you follow every rule, they can still try to erase you. That's why it's not enough to be good, you have to be visible." She closed the journal and placed it beside her pillow. That night, she didn't sleep well, but she didn't cry either. And in the early morning, just before sunrise, she sat up in bed and made a quiet decision. She would return to school, not because everything was fixed, not because she felt ready, but because she refused to be pushed out of the space she had every right to belong in. And that choice, though small, was a kind of power too. The morning Talia returned to school, the sky was dull and the wind was sharp, tugging at the ends of her coat as she stood at the edge of the sidewalk. She held her backpack straps tightly, knuckles pale under the pressure. The school building in front of her looked the same bricks, same windows, same narrow entrance with the scratched-up metal frame. But it felt different, heavier, like walking back into a room where something had broken and never been cleaned up. She stood still for a long time. She wasn't afraid of getting in trouble anymore. That part was over. But fear had a way of shifting shapes. Now it had taken the form of questions she couldn't quite answer. Would they look at her differently? Would the teachers avoid her eyes? Would her classmates whisper louder this time? Would they roll theirs when she raised her hand again, thinking she was trying to be something she wasn't? She thought of the way Carrington had looked at her during the hearing, measured, careful, not defeated, but certainly wary. There had been something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Not regret, not guilt, just the sudden uncomfortable awareness that someone had seen him clearly and said it out loud. And now she had to walk back into the world he still controlled. Denise had offered to walk in with her. Talia had said no. This part she needed to do alone. She took one slow breath and stepped through the door. Inside, everything looked the same. The same buzz of students talking too loud near the lockers. The same fluorescent lights humming faintly overhead. But the moment she entered, the air around her shifted. Heads turned. Conversations dipped in volume. A few kids tried not to stare, but they did anyway. She caught one girl nudge another, whispering just a little too loud. That's her. Talia kept walking. Her boots made soft thuds against the hallway floor. She felt her shoulders tense but kept her chin up. She wasn't walking fast. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't hiding either. Near the science wing, a boy she barely knew from biology class gave her a quick nod. It was small, unsure, but respectful. Another girl, Nari, the one who had texted her, walked past with her friends and gave her a brief smile. Not wide, but real. Talia nodded back. That helped. Not enough to quiet everything, but enough to take the edge off. When she reached her locker, she paused. For a moment, she just stood there, hand on the lock, staring at the dent near the hinge where someone had once slammed it shut too hard. She'd never noticed it before. Funny what you see when you're really looking. She turned the dial slowly, opened it. Inside, nothing had been touched. Her notebooks were still there, her pens, the old photo of her and her mom at a park from years ago. Everything where she'd left it, like the building had been waiting for her to return. From behind, someone cleared their throat. Talia turned. It was Miss Grover, her English teacher. Mid-40s, quiet voice, glasses always resting too far down her nose. I'm glad to see you back, she said, her voice soft but intentional. Talia blinked. Thanks. If you need anything, Ms. Grover continued, extra time, space, whatever, just let me know. Talia nodded. Okay. Then Ms. Grover did something unexpected. She stepped a little closer and said even more quietly, Some of us were proud of you. Just so you know. And then she walked away. Talia stood there for a few seconds, processing. It didn't erase the tension in the hallway. It didn't undo what had happened. But it added something. A crack in the wall that had felt so solid just moments before. First period was math. She walked in and took her usual seat by the window. A few students glanced over. The teacher, Mr. Weems, barely acknowledged her return, except for a tight nod at the attendance sheet. And maybe that was better. Maybe she didn't want the fanfare. She didn't need it. What she needed was to be seen, as a student, as a person, not a rumor, not a case file. The lesson started. Numbers on the board, pencils scratching paper, low murmurs as students tried to remember formulas. Talia opened her notebook. Her hand still shook slightly when she wrote, but she kept writing. As the class went on, she looked out the window and saw a small group of freshmen walking across the courtyard, laughing about something she couldn't hear. It was such a normal scene, ordinary, and for a split second, she missed being part of that. She missed not thinking about power and policy and hearings. She missed being invisible. But then she thought about the hearing again, the table, the people with clipboards, the moment her voice didn't shake, and she realized there was something stronger than being invisible. It was being undeniable. She turned back to her notebook and underlined the date twice. This wasn't the end of anything. It was the start of her being heard. By lunchtime, the rhythm of the school day had started to return, at least on the surface. Students drifted through the halls with trays in hand, voices rising and falling with the usual bursts of teenage chaos. But wherever Talia walked, she could feel it. The space around her just slightly wider than it had been before. People moved around her like she carried something too sharp to touch. No one said anything cruel. No one confronted her. But the absence of kindness was its own kind of cold. She held her tray of food, barely anything, just some crackers, an apple, and a carton of milk, and stood in the middle of the cafeteria, unsure where to sit. The table where she usually ate felt far away, like it belonged to a different version of her. She saw two of her classmates sitting there already, glancing over, then turning back to their phones. They didn't wave. They didn't smile. She almost turned to leave. But then she heard her name. Talia. It was Nari sitting at a smaller table by the windows, a half-eaten sandwich in front of her, and a book propped open beside it. She waved again. Over here. Talia hesitated for a second. Just one. Then she made her way over and sat down across from her. I was hoping you'd come back today, Nari said casually, like it was no big deal. But her tone carried something underneath, something kind. I almost didn't, Talia admitted, opening her milk and taking a sip just to keep her hands busy. Nari picked up a fry and pointed it at her like it was a microphone. Well, I'm glad you did. That was brave. What you said in the hearing. Talia looked up, surprised. How did you... My older sister works in the admin building, Nari said with a smirk. People talk, especially when the district gets called out by a 15-year-old girl with a spine of steel. Talia laughed, but it was small, unsure. It didn't feel like steel, more like string. Nari smiled, still held. For the first time that day, something in Talia's chest eased. Not completely, but enough. As they ate, more students filtered in and out. A few looked over. One boy nodded. Another girl, someone Talia had done a group project with once, gave her a thumbs up. They didn't come over, but they noticed her. And the looks were changing. Less wary, less suspicious, more thoughtful. Still, when Nari went to throw away her trash, Talia sat alone for a few minutes. That's when she saw him. Principal Carrington. He entered the cafeteria from the far door, walking slowly, clipboard in hand. He was doing what he always did, making rounds, observing. But this time he paused when he saw her. Their eyes met for half a second. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. He looked at her like someone checking a locked door, making sure it stayed shut. Then he moved on. Talia felt her heart spike again, just briefly. Old habits. The fear came back like a shadow, quick and cold. She pressed her thumb against the edge of the table, grounding herself. She reminded herself, he doesn't control the story anymore, not completely. But still, the knot in her stomach twisted tighter. When she got home that evening, she didn't go straight to her room. She sat at the dining table where her mother was typing on her laptop, her glasses perched low on her nose. Denise looked up, took one look at her daughter's face, and closed the screen. Rough day? She asked softly. Talia didn't answer right away, she just nodded. I went back, she finally said, and I made it through, but he was there, and I saw it in his face. Denise didn't interrupt. She waited. He's not sorry, Talia whispered. No, her mother agreed, he's not. And he still has power, she added, her voice barely audible. He still gets to walk through that building like nothing happened. Denise reached over and placed her hand over her daughter's. Power doesn't disappear overnight, Talia, she said, but it shifts, quietly, slowly. Every time you speak, every time you stand tall, you move it a little more. Talia looked down at their hands. Her mother's fingers were firm, warm, steady. What if he tries something again? Denise paused. Then we do what we did before. We document, we fight, we don't let silence win. Talia exhaled slowly. It wasn't the reassurance she wanted, but it was the truth. Later that night, she sat by her window with her journal again. The page was blank, and the pen felt heavy in her hand. She didn't know what to write. Not yet. But for now, she wrote one line across the top. They want you to feel small, so you won't ask big questions. Then she underlined it, twice. And for the first time, she believed her own words. Friday came with a pale sunrise and a hush in the air that felt almost intentional. It had been 1 full week since the hearing. Talia stood at her locker, pretending to be busy with a notebook she didn't need, her fingers tracing the edge of the paper without turning a single page. All morning, she'd felt the ripple, subtle, like the school itself was waiting for something. Not in the way kids wait for fire drills or snow closures, but something quieter, unspoken. At the end of second period, just before the bell rang, an announcement buzzed over the intercom. The voice of the district superintendent filled every hallway, every classroom. This is an administrative notice. We would like to inform all staff and students that Principal Reed Carrington is currently on extended administrative leave pending a full internal review. During this time, Assistant Principal Mary Weston will serve as acting principal. Talia froze. So did half the room. The teacher stopped mid-sentence, chalk still raised at the board. A few students looked at each other, eyes wide. One kid even whispered, "Wait, what?" Talia didn't move. She sat very still in her seat, her hands folded tightly in her lap, pressing so hard her nails dug into her skin. She didn't smile. She didn't gasp. She didn't even breathe deeply. She just sat there, because something inside her had shifted in a way she hadn't prepared for. It wasn't joy. It wasn't even relief. It was something quieter, heavier, validation, proof, not in the form of an apology, not in the way she might have imagined when all this began, but in something real, official, and public, something no one could ignore, no matter how fast they tried to sweep it away. After class, the hall buzzed like it hadn't in weeks. Students whispered more openly now. A boy she barely knew passed her by and said, "Yo, that was you, huh?" But not with mockery, with a kind of impressed curiosity. She just nodded slightly and kept walking. By lunch, the news had reached every corner of the school, and by then it was no longer a question of if something had changed. It was now clear that it had. She found herself back at Nari's table again. This time Nari was waiting with a grin already on her face. "Girl," she said, leaning in. "You saw the look on Mr. Davis's face when they announced that? He dropped his pen like he'd seen a ghost." Talia couldn't help but smile. Just a little. "You good?" Nari asked, softer now. Talia paused. Her instinct was to say yes. That's what people expect. That's what made everything easier. But she shook her head instead. "I don't know," she said honestly. "It doesn't feel how I thought it would." Nari nodded. "Yeah, that makes sense." "It's not like I wanted him fired," Talia added almost to herself. "I just wanted it to mean something. I wanted someone to say, 'We see you.'" "You think this means they saw you?" Nari asked. Talia looked down at her lunch. She thought about the hearing, about the silence afterward, about the hallway stairs. And now, this. "I think they couldn't look away anymore," she said. That night at home, Denise was already sitting at the kitchen table when Talia walked in. She had a printed letter in her hand. It bore the school district's seal. Talia's eyes locked on it immediately. Denise held it up. You want to read it? Talia hesitated, then nodded. She unfolded the letter carefully. It was brief. No more than 3 paragraphs. The language was official, restrained, and vague in all the ways legal documents tend to be. But the key sentence was there, near the end. We acknowledge that the disciplinary action taken against Talia Moore failed to meet procedural standards and was not supported by adequate documentation. The action has been permanently removed from her record, and a formal policy review is now underway. Talia read the sentence twice, then a third time. Her chest felt tight again, but not with anxiety, with something else. Something like peace. Not loud peace. Not the kind that explodes. The kind that just settles. She folded the letter again and placed it back on the table. They didn't say sorry, she said. No, Denise replied. They didn't. But they said I was right. They did. Talia stared at the ceiling for a moment. Then she asked quietly, Is it bad that I still don't feel finished? Denise gave a small, sad smile. It's never finished. That's the truth they don't teach us. But that doesn't mean what you did doesn't matter. She reached out and placed her hand over Talia's. You didn't just defend yourself, she said. You put something on record. That's how change starts. Talia nodded, eyes glistening. She didn't cry. But the weight of it all sat gently behind her ribs, pulsing like a second heartbeat. She went to bed early that night, but not before taking out her journal. This time she didn't hesitate. She wrote, Justice doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it comes with silence, a heavy letter, and a space where fear used to live. She stared at it, then added one last sentence. And that's enough, for today. Then she closed the book, and slept with her window open, letting the cool air remind her. The world was still flawed, still loud, still unfair. But she had changed, and she wasn't going back. Spring arrived slowly that year. It didn't burst in with warmth or sunshine. It crept, little by little. Bare branches softened with green. Wind lost its sharpness. Light lingered longer in the evenings, and with it something inside Talia began to shift too, not all at once, but quietly, like thawing. 2 weeks had passed since the letter from the district, since the hearing, since Carrington's name stopped appearing on the staff bulletins. Things at school began to stabilize. Students stopped staring. Teachers spoke to her the way they used to. Some still avoided her eyes, careful not to linger too long. Others, like Ms. Grover, offered a kind word here or there, always subtle, always brief. No one ever said the word apology, but the difference showed up in small things, like how no teacher called her disruptive when she asked too many questions in class, how one of the guidance counselors quietly handed her a flyer for the district's new student feedback committee, or how a notice appeared on the school bulletin board inviting students to attend a town hall on fairness and disciplinary policies. None of those things had existed before, and while no one pinned her name to them, she felt it. She had changed something. Not the whole system. Not yet. But a corner of it. A crack in the surface that couldn't be painted over anymore. One afternoon she stayed late after school. The campus was quieter, emptied of noise and footsteps. She wandered through the halls alone, running her fingers lightly along the row of lockers, pausing when she reached the main office. The door was closed. Through the glass she saw Assistant Principal Weston inside, speaking softly to a staff member. The light in there felt softer somehow.